This also reminds us that the enemy knows the Bible too, and this reminds us why the matriarchs of Israel were so hounded. Look at Sarah, Rebecca, Rachel. They were barren. They could not have children. The Messiah would not have been born, but the Lord intervened in each one of those cases and miraculously opened a womb. And thanks to that, the Messiah was born. The candles are lit. After that, the head of the house is going to put on a special garment called a kittel. Goes on like this. And like this. And like this. Now you know why there's so many Jewish doctors. And he'll put on his prayer shawl. If any of you have been to a synagogue or a bar mitzvah, you'll see the men wearing their prayer shawls. They have tassels on the corners, a commandment to the Hebrews to remind them of the covenant they made at Mount Sinai after they left Egypt. By the way, folks, we've been doing this Passovers for over 3,500 years. This is not a tradition that came last week. But instead of wearing the usual yarmulke or skull cap as a sign of respect to God, the night of Passover, the man of the house is going to wear something a little more elaborate, symbolic of a crown. Because the night of Passover, the man of the house is the king of the house. And in a Jewish family, it's the only night of the year that he's king of the house. And as the king of the house, he's going to guide his family through the traditional Passover Seder. Seder is Hebrew for order, because there's an order to this. Using this book called a Haggadah, which means the telling, because it's all about telling a story. And he's going to use 4 cups of juice and a Seder plate to help us tell the story of Passover. There's 6 different food items that are going to help us understand the story of Passover. And none of those items are deviled eggs. By the way, I'd like to thank everyone who helped set up this Mono Seder. They did a great job. Looks wonderful. Good. At this point, the head of the house is going to lift up the first cup of the Passover Seder, the cup of sanctification. This sets the night apart from all the other nights. He's going to hold it like this and say a Hebrew prayer that goes like this. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam borei peri hagafen. Amen. Which translates into, Blessed are you, O Lord our God, King of the universe, creator of the fruit of the vine. Cup of sanctification, you may all partake a sip of grape juice. After that, the head of the house is going to move over to the Seder plate, and he's going to start to tell the story of Passover. How Jacob, the patriarch of the Jewish people, living in the land of Canaan, which is Israel, had 12 sons. And one of the youngest was his favorite. His name was Joseph, or Yosef. And the older brothers were not too happy about it. And at a time of frustration, they sold him to some slave traders on their way to Egypt, a couple hundred miles away, and lied to their father and said he got killed by some wild animals. Jacob was devastated. And if that wasn't bad enough, while in Egypt, poor Joseph got falsely accused and thrown into prison by the wife of his master. But God was with Joseph, and he gave him the gift of interpreting dreams. And it just so happened that the king of Egypt, the Pharaoh, the most powerful man of those days, had a dream that tormented him every night. And none of his psychics or mystics or astrologers could interpret those dreams. But he heard of Joseph's gift and called him out of prison and asked him, "Can you interpret these dreams that have been tormenting me every night?" And Joseph said, "No, can't do, but my God can." And sure enough, he did. The dreams were prophetic. They foretold of 7 years of plenty and 7 years of nothing. Pharaoh saw that God was with Joseph, and he made him his right-hand man, put him in charge of all the grain of Egypt. And with God's wisdom, Joseph stashed away 25% of all the grain that came in for those 7 years of plenty. And sure enough, the 8th year hit, and nothing was growing anywhere in that region. And it wasn't long before the brothers of Joseph were sent to Egypt to buy grain. And there they were, right in front of their brothers. You ever wonder why they didn't recognize them? I mean, okay, several years had passed, but come on, he's their flesh and blood. Kind of reminds me, I grew up in San Francisco, and I had this children's Bible, big, thick children's Bible, lots of pictures. I don't know where I got it. Maybe it was a house cleaner or a babysitter. But I like to flip through and look at the pictures as a kid. And there were pictures of Moses and King David and Samson, and they all look Jewish. Then you get to the New Testament part, and there's this 7-foot-tall, blonde-haired, blue-eyed Norwegian Jesus. And you're like, who is that? And what does he have to do with this? There's like a disconnect. And that's how Jews see Jesus now. They don't see him as one of their own. They don't recognize him. The brothers of Joseph didn't recognize him until he said, "I am Joseph," and their eyes were open. What's their first reaction? They're horrified. This is the guy they betrayed, and now he's the second most powerful man in all of Egypt? They are chopped liver. But that's quickly replaced by great joy and reconciliation. Kind of reminds me when I came to see who Jesus really is, that he's not just some crazy rabbi in the desert, but that he's the Lord. I was horrified. My whole life I've been using his name as a bad word. But that was quickly replaced by great joy and reconciliation. So the brothers are reconciled, and the Pharaoh at the time had favor on the Hebrew people. And he allowed them to come and dwell in the land of Goshen, Jacob and his whole clan, the best land of Egypt. Jacob was overjoyed to know that his favorite son lived, and agreed to come and live in Egypt during the famine, or they would have all died. And there the Hebrew people lived and prospered and multiplied, so much so that when the new Pharaoh took over, he was not too happy. And he was afraid they would ally with an enemy of Egypt and come against him. And we read about this in the book of Exodus. Chapter 1, verse 8. Then a new king, who did not know about Joseph, came to power in Egypt. "Look," he said to his people, "the Israelites have become much too numerous for us. Come, we must deal shrewdly with them, or they will become even more numerous. And if war breaks out, we'll join our enemies, fight against us, and leave the country." So they put slave masters over them to oppress them. with forced labor. And they built Pithom and Ramses as store cities for Pharaoh. But the more they were oppressed, the more they multiplied and spread. So the Egyptians came to dread the Israelites and worked them ruthlessly. They made their lives bitter with hard labor in brick and mortar and with all kinds of work in the fields. In all their hard labor, the Egyptians used them ruthlessly. It's at this point that the head of the house will move over to the Seder plate and lift up the first item of the Seder plate, fresh parsley, symbolic of life. And it's dipped in salt water, symbolic of tears. And we make tears to remind us that a life of slavery is a life filled with tears. So you have a parsley stem on your plate. You may dip it in the salt water and remember that a life of slavery is a life filled with tears. And if you'd like, you may eat the parsley. You want to start the evening with fresh breath. A life of slavery is a life filled with tears. Good. The second item on the Seder plate is a horseradish root. This is a very bitter root, and it's a visual reminder of the bitterness of life as a slave. The third item, my favorite, fresh ground horseradish. Now we're supposed to eat a whole teaspoon of this stuff. You know what happens when you do that? You cry whether you like it or not. Now, since my Lord is merciful, I will be merciful. And I'm going to let you take it with some matzah. Is that okay? So you have some unleavened bread there. Break off a piece and slap on as much of that horseradish as you can handle. You have that white horseradish there. And when you're ready, hold it up. We're all going to partake together. I want to see who can put on the most here. Hold it up when you're ready. Okay, he's looking good. Pastor Bill's looking good over here. Greg, you need some help there. Okay, hold it up, everyone ready? Okay, this is supposed to be the taste of slavery. On 3. 1, 2, 3, down the hatch.
It's not. I need a fish.
We'll stop that.
Don't worry, there's plenty for
I
second.
need a fish. Take now. Đúng chứ?เอาปลาด้วยสิต้องมีปลาด้วยพี่ไม่หมดเนี่ย
Good.
เอาที่เดี๋ยวร้องไห้
Okay. Now, the fourth item is called haroset. It's a sweet mixture of apples, honey, cinnamon, almonds, And it's supposed to remind us of the cement or the mortar that we were forced to make as slaves for almost 400 years. Why use a sweet mixture for that? Because we had the promise of God that He would one day take us to the promised land, and that kept us going. So at this point, you may all indulge in the cement, the haroset, slap some on some matzah, and enjoy. There's almonds in there. Oh, there's walnuts? Oh, okay, just almonds, in case anyone has allergies. There are no walnuts in this. No walnuts. Apples, honey, cinnamon, and almonds. By the way, whoever made it did a great job. Give them a hand. The next item is a hard-boiled brown egg. It's called the Hagigah, brown to remind us of the temple's stones. In 70 AD, the temple that was destroyed by the Romans in Jerusalem. The stones were a brownish, pinkish color. And it's placed over fire to remind us that the temple was burned and destroyed to the ground. It's a symbol of mourning for most of my Jewish people. Hundreds of thousands of Jews were slaughtered or died of hunger. It was a brutal time, and we were kicked out of Jerusalem. But this also reminds us that Jesus was 100% accurate when it came to prophecy. And one of his prophecies was that of this magnificent temple, there would not be one stone left on another. And when he told that to the Jewish religious leaders, they mocked him because it was such an incredible edifice. But that's exactly what happened. Not one stone was left on another. Anyone know why? The gold, that's right. There was lots of gold in that temple. The walls were paved with it inside in the Holy of Holies. And when it was burned, it all melted into the cracks. Hey, at $1,200 an ounce, I'd be moving stones too. This also reminds us that no Jew could pop up after 70 AD and say, hey fellas, guess what, I'm the Messiah. Because the Jewish people kept very strict genealogical records in the temple because of the prophecy that Messiah had to have proof that he was a descendant of King David. All those records were burned and destroyed. So no Jew right now has proof of their lineage. I was told by my grandmother that I come from the Levites, but there's no proof. It will not stand in a court of law. It's just word of mouth. But Jesus existed pre-70 AD. He had access to his lineage, and it's clearly written in the book of Matthew and Luke that he is a descendant of King David. So at this time, you may enjoy your egg. If you'd like to dip it in the salt water, go ahead. If you'd like to, yes. Or some of you creative folks are having it with horseradish. That must be good. Eggs and horseradish. So this is supposed to be a symbol of mourning for most of the Jewish people. Good. After that, the head of the house is going to lift up the second cup, the cup of plagues. And here we remember in the book of Exodus how the Pharaoh wanted to deal shrewdly with the Hebrew people. And we read in verse 19 of Exodus chapter 1, the king of Egypt said to the Hebrew midwives, whose names were Shiphrah and Puah, must have been Hawaiian. When you help the Hebrew women in childbirth and observe them on the delivery stool, if it is a boy, kill him, but if it is a girl, let her live. The midwives, however, feared God and did not do what the king of Egypt had told them to do. They let the boys live. Then the king of Egypt summoned the midwives and asked them, "Why have you done this? Why have you let the boys live?" The midwives answered Pharaoh, "Hebrew women are not like Egyptian women. They are vigorous and give birth before the midwives arrive." So God was kind to the midwives, and the people increased and became even more numerous. And because the midwives feared God, he gave them families of their own. Then Pharaoh gave this order to all his people: every Hebrew boy that is born you must throw into the Nile, but let every girl live. Folks,